Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from LexisNexis and the Family Law imprint. It's called Domestic Abuse and it's being written by Roger Bird, who is a retired district judge. This book is now in its 8th edition and it's dealing with a very important subject. Now, can I say that when the book was published, the Domestic Abuse Bill was still going through Parliament. It's now become the Domestic Abuse Act and has received both the royal assent and is in force. So quite a lot of what's in the book is making the assumption that the bill is now an act. Let's have a look at the book first of all. There's the front, there's the spine, and then there's the back. There's not a lot of information on the back. It describes this book as a practitioner's guide, comprehensive in dealing with cases involving personal protection, harassment and domestic abuse. And it contains in one portable and easy to use volume all the essential materials you need. And it's been thoroughly revised again to take account, as I say, of the bill before it became an act. And there are, of course, appendices. If we go to the back of the book, you can see the index is by paragraph numbering. It's very much the house style of LexisNexis. Then at the front, you've got the front page there. You've also got a warning, which I will give, and that is one: every care has been taken to ensure the accuracy of this work. No responsibility for loss or damage occasioned to any person acting or refraining from action as a result of any statement in it can be accepted by the authors, editors or publishers. And I give that warning because this is a guide. It's comprehensive, it's trying to help people, but don't take this as being legal advice in that sense, because in an area of law as complex as this, where you're dealing with occupation orders, non-molestation orders and so forth, each case has to be looked at on its own. There's the blurb at the front. I will talk about the preface which Roger has written. It's dated October 2020, and that's the date when the law says that the law is as at the October 2020, prior to the introduction of the Act. Then you've got the contents section, which sets out. It starts off with the actual bill and where it was when the book was published. Obviously there have been delays with the bill because of COVID. It then looks at various personal protection, then goes on to the occupation order itself at chapter 6, and then after that you've got Protection from Harassment Act 1997. So you've got quite a lot of the earlier legislation there as well. And then it looks specifically at transfer of tenancies, that area. Then chapter 11 deals with the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, and then you have various 12 chapters in total. What you have in addition to that, in fact, in chapter 12 is a specific reference to Practice Direction 12J, which is of course very important in this area. And then you have 3 appendices at the back, and then the index. Then you've got a very useful short abbreviation section, which I found helpful. Then you have the tables of statutes. You've got tables then of statutory instruments. Then, of course, you've got cases. Not that many cases, but enough to indicate where you're going. Now, the introduction of the Domestic Abuse Bill is covered, as it then was, and it refers to the earlier legislation, which is the Domestic Violence and Matrimonial Proceedings Act of 1976. And as I say, you can see from the book, there's a very large amount of detailed information helping specifically with things like both the Children Act itself and the Family Law Act, both of which are directly relevant to this area. But what I will refer you to finally is some comments made by the author. He talks about the bill as it then was and the recent debates. And he says that many politicians have given the impression that the existing law contains no protection against such abuse. That's the earlier legislation from the 70s, and urgent action was required. And then certain people have gone further and said that Possibly the new provisions would enable a victim of abuse to remain in the family home, whereas in the past it would always be a she, would have been required to leave. I have to say that that's still the current position in a number of cases I've had, where in fact I don't like the outcome at all. But however, that's the way the law has been, because it allows the perpetrator to remain in the property. Obviously, we are aware as practitioners that the court's ability to eject a perpetrator of abuse from his home has existed, and obviously I referred to the earlier legislation, and that's covered right at the beginning, when in fact an historic indication is given of how the law actually was operating from about the 1970s. Obviously, the new Act is a further attempt to build on what we've had previously with what they call the foundations, and it provides more protection against the scourge of domestic abuse. And I hope that that is the case. We have to wait and see, of course. Having said that, and it's my concluding remarks now, which I've quoted from Roger Bird, the Act is clearly an improvement on the previous law. Referring again to the history, he says, which he mentions in chapter 1, what is notable is the increased tendency over recent years for the state and public authorities to take over the task of providing protection. Now, that's where one of the problems has been, because in the past the police have not wanted to get involved in what they call a domestic. And that's been very unfortunate, because in fact quite a lot of the nonsense could have been stopped. However, we are where we are. What began then as a responsibility of individual victims and their lawyers is now squarely a duty laid on the police and other public bodies. Whether they're up to the task or not, I don't know. I do know that certainly dealing with the public authorities, with care proceedings and so forth, we are aware of the concerns which social workers have, and I'm glad, very grateful for a lot of the work that they do. Let me conclude with this comment. The law cannot change human nature, but can do its best to continue to improve the ways in which excesses are contained, and to learn from the experience of earlier attempts. And he then says, for the time being, the new law and remedies will exist side by side with the old law, and he's done his best to explain what the position is. And can I say, I think it's an excellent book. Obviously in the appendix, which is about halfway through, you start off with the Children Act and then the other pieces of legislation. But what you've got here is, for the 8th edition, I think an important work, but I don't think the job is done yet, and I would expect another edition to come out when we see how the new Act works. In the meantime, a big thank you to LexisNexis Family Law Imprint and to Roger Bird for the amount of work he's put into this book. It makes our lives a great deal easier, so a very big thank you to everybody concerned. Bye-bye.